mind, the definition issue was raised several times. So I think my first question then has to go to Henrik Laursen, who is the coordinator of the different DGs on that kind of questions, and even maybe to talk a little bit with us about what is the status quo of the definition debate at the moment in Brussels. And yeah, maybe we could start with that, Henrik.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it is true that there were quite a number of references to the definition. First, I would like to say that we developed the recommendation for definition because we saw that there were several pieces of legislation being developed at EU level which contained specific references to nanomaterials, i.e. specific provisions. Labeling requirements, risk assessment requirements, specifically targeting nanomaterials. And we saw at the same time that different versions of definitions were introduced in different pieces of legislation, which eventually would mean that one nanomaterial in one set of legislation would not be identified as a nanomaterial in another legislation. And we generally don't think that is an appropriate way of dealing with legislation. So that was the primary motivation. Of course, we've also long since had the ambition to come with a definition because it's been a general acknowledged fact that the absence of a definition renders the discussion on how to regulate nanomaterials complicated. I can perfectly also well understand that companies who have been in the nano business for longer than October 2011 have seen a need to identify what it is they're dealing with, and that they therefore would have a different type of definition. And without underestimating the efforts they put into that, it might also be that those companies have had a slightly easier task in the sense that their interests have been focused on specific properties for specific uses and perhaps a limited number of materials. We, on the other hand, found ourselves in the situation that we had to define something that would be able to be used in many different sets of regulation, covering many different sectors. The process is that it is now established in several pieces of legislation. So it's in operation. It's in operation in in biocides. There's hard work going on in Sanko dealing with cosmetics. There's food. So it is nowadays a relatively established definition, but we have promised that we will make a review towards the end of next year, where we will build on the experience we are gaining, see whether we need to revise the definition. But that work is still in its early phase, but it's certainly work that will start.
Yeah.
Our purpose with the definition was to make sure that we could make a discrimination between materials that fulfill the nanomaterial definition and other materials. That was our ambition. So if you go down the route of expanding labeling or communication requirements specifically to the nano definition, it is not covered by the original intention behind the Commission recommendation. We said we want to primarily for it to be used in a regulatory context, and we also explicitly said that when it comes to that, it might well be that it's a broad definition, but we will only deal with a subset of materials that fulfill the definition when we are using it in a specific piece of legislation. And I think, without prejudging the outcome of what is going to happen on cosmetics, it's quite evident that the limitation to bioaccumulative, biopersistent substances will not change just because of the introduction of the definition. That will stay. Those will still.